who are responsible for these maps, it's ultimately Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas and Senate Pro Tem Mike McGuire. They are not here to answer our questions about ultimately these maps.
Should talk to
I know, I'd love to. This is the second time they haven't shown up when a ballot measure is placed on the ballot by the legislature to answer questions from reporters. My question is, if those two end up running for Congress after this,
Ashley, I don't.
How could that
Ashley,
impact this campaign?
I don't even.
How could that impact this campaign?
I don't.
I mean, considering voters did not want politicians drawing lines for themselves.
You have to ask them. You have to ask them.
So it's been a while since we've discussed redistricting, but considering the California special election is less than a month away, vote no on Prop 50, by the way, I figured it is time to check in on Gavin Newsom, who is not so happy. As a matter of fact, he's fuming at the moment after he's getting exactly what he wished for, right? He's in the find out stage of this entire process that we warned him about since the beginning, which was to say what? As I was saying back during the Texas battle, if Democrats want to get into this mutually assured destruction scenario with us, where they're redistricting, we're trying to outpace each other, that is not a scenario that Democrats win. Because when you break down the post-2020 census, the reality is many Democrat states in this country have already gerrymandered at or close to their ceiling, right? It's the Republicans who drew much more quote-unquote fair congressional maps, and all that Texas is simply doing at the moment is responding and now leveling that playing field for the Republican Party. But you know what Newsom and the entire Democrat Party could have done? Let it happen and left well enough alone. But instead, because Newsom decided to pull his political stunt in order to launch the 2028 campaign and draw a bunch of attention to himself, he has, of course, created even more fuel for other Republicans to push harder on redistricting because, again, now this is a national back and forth situation. And this week, he is facing those exact consequences as GOP leaders in at least 2 states are now moving forward with their plans to redistrict their own state, which would further cancel out even potential gains made by a redrawing of California. But it does not stop there, because this is coming on the exact same week where the Supreme Court is now officially hearing the case on the Voting Rights Act when it comes to racial gerrymandering. We've explained this before. We'll talk about it again. But to make a long story short for the intro, this is a loophole in civil rights legislation that gives a massive political advantage to House Democrats in this country. It's looking like that might be overturned as well. So again, Gavin Newsom, you're now in the find out stage of F around and find out. We warned you, but we'll tell you all about that situation, guys, in today's video. So that said, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work and ensure that we can keep doing these videos. And to briefly recap, I mean, thus far, we know by now, Texas is basically adding 5 Republican seats. But ever since, Missouri, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, has already confirmed they've added 1, right? That is a done deal. But the news this week is that Kansas Republican lawmakers have just officially, now it's not just talk, they're going to do it, right? Greenlit a special session to draw out the last remaining Democrat congressional district, which you can see right here, ahead of the 2026 midterms. That'll be a solid +1 for the GOP, and they're not the only one. So thus far, right? So Newsom said his retaliation was going to cancel out the 5 seats of Texas. And realistically, he can't draw out every Republican district in California and expect that to hold up. Even when gerrymandering is kind of sort of legal, you're only allowed to go so far or else it won't be approved in court, right? But let's recap. Let's say California adds 5 and Texas adds 5. Okay, well, thus far, I think Missouri added 1. Kansas is about to add 1. And as you'll see in a second here, North Carolina is about to add 1. So we're still at R+3, but again, the bloodbath, figuratively speaking, for Newsom and the redistricting thing does not yet end. But here's some news on North Carolina. So there, the GOP leaders plan to vote next week on redrawing the state's U.S. House map to flip a competitive district and secure an 11th Republican seat. The move, which has been spurred obviously by Trump's call to counter Democratic redistricting, targets Representative Don Davis's district. And by the way, let's be completely real on this front. Most Republican state governments in this country are incredibly soft, lazy, and lackadaisical. There's a couple of exceptions, Florida and recently Texas do come to mind, But largely speaking, if this was there's a reason, by the way, back in 2020, for instance, they did not heavily gerrymander because they just didn't have the energy to do it. But again, Newsom, what did you do by calling this special election and making this huge issue? And then the Democrats are fleeing and J.B. Pritzker is sheltering the Texas lawmakers in Chicago and all this garbage, is you gave the GOP a lot of the needed political energy and capital it had to get to move even further on this issue. So as you can see, Newsom currently not so happy about it. He's saying, and I quote, "The pathetic legislative leaders of North Carolina haven't even passed a budget." By the way, coming from the same exact guy who is $20 billion in debt with his state budget. It hasn't been balanced in several years, but okay, haven't passed the budget. And what are they busy doing? Rigging the next election for Trump. Of course, coming from the exact guy whose state is facing massive economic and financial problems. And what is he busy doing? Rigging the next election on behalf of the Democrats. But yeah, he projects, what else is new? But anyways, he goes on to say their priorities are clear. Bend the knee to Trump, screw over North Carolina. Remember that. Again, I say, what exactly are your priorities then? Again, he's largely coping here because, yes, the second and third hand consequences of the action he decided to do really was not all that smart, right? As usual, we're watching as Democrats and leftists are really bad at political strategy because they don't understand that, if we do something and it's impulsive and in the moment it makes us feel really good, whether that's rioting or committing political violence or doing this redistricting stunt, we apparently can't comprehend that the consequences and backlash of that might screw us over even more. But ladies and gentlemen, it only starts there. Alex Padilla, California senator, is responding to North Carolina saying, "This is why we need to vote yes on Prop 50. Vote no, by the way. North Carolina is the latest Republican-led state to bend the knee to Trump and consider redrawing their congressional lines. Again, as the Democrat government of California bends the knee to its radical left base. But whatever, they want to steal enough seats to control Congress, regardless of how the people vote. Really, if Californians don't act now, Donald Trump will seize total power for 2 more years. Yeah, so we're going to gerrymander to respond to their gerrymandering, even though we already gerrymandered. This tweet sums it up very well. Redistricting was okay when New York did it, which they did, by the way. Let's not forget that New York did mid-decade redistricting. And by the way, the initial map they took to the state Supreme Court got rejected by the Democrat state Supreme Court because even they said it was too gerrymandered and unfair to Republicans. Now these people are calling us the gerrymanderers. It's so ridiculous. By the way, can we also just be honest about this? Can we be mature adults and not pretend to virtue signal about so much stuff? Yes, ultimately, partisan redistricting is a thing. Yes, ultimately, if you have power in a state government, you're going to try to draw it in your own partisan favor. Democrats do it. Now Republicans are basically countering and doing it. Don't sit here and claim moral superiority over this, Democrats. Okay, ultimately, this is politics. Politics, in a sense, is always kind of cynical. It's always kind of power-driven. Don't sit here and pretend like it's not. The Republicans are trying to rig the elections. Really? But anyways, it was okay when New York did it. It stopped being okay when Texas did it, but it's okay again if California does it, but now it's bad if North Carolina is doing it. Just all over the place and completely incoherent. But whatever I guess they need to say to energize their insane, deranged, violent voter base to go out and vote, I guess that is the move. But ladies and gentlemen, even with the Newsom retaliation, even if Illinois and New York and other states try to do it, doesn't seem like the picture is about to get very good for them. Because as the Wall Street Journal points out, a Supreme Court reckoning for racial gerrymandering this week. The justices are indeed hearing the arguments in Louisiana versus Calais, which challenges race-based gerrymandering in the Civil Rights Act. Now, to briefly give you the background on this, as a result, not the Civil Rights Act, I should say the Voting Rights Act, as a result of civil rights legislation back in the 1960s, it is legally mandated in America that basically if your state has a certain number of minorities, whether that's like Black or Latino voters, you have to draw out race-based districts for them. It's essentially legally state-mandated race-based gerrymandering, which to me seems actually incoherent with the entire supposed point of civil rights, right? It's like actual racial discrimination when it comes to redistricting, and it's mandated by the federal government. But of course, right, that's by the way, the very argument against it is, hey, this is actually like inconsistent with the doctrines of fairness and equality and all of that. But what it's currently doing across America, especially in southern states, is giving Democrats a massive national advantage. Because even in a place like Alabama, for instance, or Mississippi, deep red places, they still mandate that there's like at least 2 to 3 Democrat districts in those places because of the race-based gerrymandering stuff, the mandate to do that, right? Because you have to draw out basically black districts in otherwise very like white Republican states. I would further point out the same thing doesn't happen in the reverse, right? In a state like New Mexico, for instance, where white people are the minority, you don't see the white people getting their own minority majority district because this only goes one way. But that said, that is again why the conservative Supreme Court currently hearing that case this week. We'll see what happens, but I would venture to guess it's kind of trending in the direction they're going to overturn it. And as a result of that, the picture for Democrats, if this does happen, no longer just becomes, oh, we're at like a 3 to 4 to 5 seat disadvantage. It is a complete electoral catastrophe. You don't believe me? Just take a listen to the math there on what would happen, especially if the Voting Rights Act and the race-based gerrymandering majority-minority districts were overturned.
Actually represents pretty accurately, mathematically, how the country is divided over the question of the presidency. But if you look at this is what the party pickups would be for congressional districts. Republicans, 5. Missouri, 1. North Carolina, 1. Ohio, 2 or 3. Indiana, 1 or 2. Florida, still discussion down there, but that could be another gold mine for them if they tipped it even further their way. Kansas 1, New Hampshire 1, and Nebraska. Democrats, Utah, California, Maryland. Look at this. If you offset California and Texas, Missouri and Utah, North Carolina and Maryland, everything left over is an advantage to the Republicans. And don't forget, the Supreme Court is considering what could really be the end of the Voting Rights Act, which would protect minority groups. So you don't have a state that's half black, for example, that elects only 1 congressional member and everybody else goes to the Republicans that would represent that population in some ways. So if that is gutted, Democrats could lose 19 seats. This would be a huge amount. But this is also a measure of how much the White House is concerned about this, because Donald Trump knows if the Democrats get the House again, there could be new investigations, just like last time. There could be a new impeachment. There could be a lot of impediment to these plans that right now the Republicans in the House and Senate are letting run like a freight train.
Yeah. Right. So there is CNN actually pointing out everything we've been talking about, which is number 1. Yes, the math does not actually add up for Democrats. They should have never tried to get into this battle with us. Because even if you do all the pro-Democrat redistricting, guess who still has more leftover seats even with the Voting Rights Act in place? The Republicans. Because after all, you guys are actually not really the majority in this country that you think you are, despite all the virtue signaling about democracy and gerrymandering. The simple reality actually is that post-2020, major factors of Democrat control only come down to gerrymandering. For instance, you look at the 2022 midterms, which I'm not excusing the Republican performance in whatsoever. But as a matter of fact, a big reason why right now the GOP House majority is so slim, despite the fact that we won the popular vote, if I'm not mistaken, both times, is actually because of the fact that Democrats are rigging the system in their own favor. Now that we're balancing the playing field and you're seeing the actual realities of how America feels and how political opinions are distributed, notice then Democrats are claiming, of course, that it is rigged. And then secondly, right, this issue of the legally mandated racial gerrymandering. Democrats say we're against gerrymandering. We want fair congressional maps. But when gerrymandering based on racial lines, and you see some of these majority minority districts, they're crazy gerrymanders, right? When that is, of course, working in their favor across this country, suddenly, they want to keep that in place. I mean, you know how it goes. I'm not here to call them hypocritical because I think that whole game is nonsensical. No, it's not that they're hypocrites, right? They're just power-driven, power-hungry maniacs. That's just why we simply need to understand the battle that we're in on many different issues in this country, not just redistricting, and simply say, okay, like, yes, the gloves are off. We need to do what needs to be done. These people that we're up against have no regard for things like actual democratic precedent or norms or civility or any of these things. But, when you're in a battle, right, you can't bring a certain thing to a fight being used with other weapons. I'm not going to say that exact slogan there, but you know what I mean by that, right? You have to fight, you have to play games on equal rules. So if Democrats are doing that, we have to do it as well. Now, that said, let's talk about the consequences of this racial gerrymandering thing, because as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is pointing out, the constitutionality of racial gerrymandering will be argued before the Supreme Court this week. If the court finds the use of race to be unconstitutional, which I think it is, then it will necessitate new congressional redistricting in a number of states across this country, including Florida. And what exactly would that mean? Well, let's check in. This is an older post, by the way, so some of the information here is outdated, but where we are currently on this redistricting issue. So thus far, we have confirmed Texas put in +5 new Republican seats. Missouri already got theirs done, so that's +1. Probable ones that appear to be coming here soon. Ohio putting in 3 more Republican seats. California, it's looking like Prop 50 will likely pass because, Democrat voters are a hive mind. So, but realistically, America First Insight here is pointing out, even if you try to gerrymander the state, you might not get more than D+4. Because again, you can't just blindly draw congressional districts however you want. They still have to stand up to legal scrutiny. The reason why it's working in Texas and some of these Republican states is because actually they still do stand up to that legal scrutiny. But of course, possible, right? Kansas R+1, that is now being done. Okay, so we should move that up to the pending category, right? Florida, especially without the Voting Rights Act in place, would gain at least 3 more Republican seats. Indiana as well. Now I'm told that the Trump administration's kind of having to go back and forth with some rhinos in that state, but that would also be an R+1. And of course, North Carolina move up to the pending category as well because they have further confirmed. Of course, when you do all of that math, that means at least R+11 at the end of the day. And then, of course, Voting Rights Act could have a significant effect. But of course, the excuses, ladies and gentlemen, are still continuing here from Gavin Newsom. He has a new talking point about this special election, by the way. It's that the billionaires are apparently trying to take over and sway the outcome here, which is really ironic for reasons we'll tell you about in a second. But he tweeted this month that attempts by billionaires and outside actors to sway elections through unethical means undermine our democracy and civic participation. California will not sit idle as our democracy is attacked. So as usual, you see the Democrat LARP, right? They always try to pose themselves as these grassroots revolutionary. Really, Gavin Newsom, the guy infamous for taking all sorts of billionaire campaign donations. He bailed out PG&E, the power company that set fire to an entire town in his state because they donated to his campaign. But of course, the billionaires, right? The billionaires, except in reality, who's being funded here by the billionaires? As one example, you see a piece out of the, I believe, New York or Los Angeles Times here, right? George Soros gives $10 million to Gavin Newsom to the redistricting fight. The sum makes the Soros family the single largest funder so far in favor of the California effort to counter President Trump. I mean, gee, you don't say. Gavin Newsom has raised roughly $70 million in less than 2 months for the California ballot measure, kicking off with Democrat financier George Soros recently kicking in $10 million, and it does not stop because even just last week, Gavin Newsom was signing a new law trying to prevent billionaires from interfering with our elections and undermining democracy. But of course, recently, billionaire Tom Stelter donated $12 million to Gavin Newsom's democracy stripping redistricting scheme, who is, of course, another prominent Democrat donor that, if I'm not mistaken, actually did run for president in the past. So, of course, this is the usual thing as well. They rail against dark money while they're, of course, relying on dark money. But again, that's why I say it's not that these people are hypocritical. They're just power-hungry, driven sociopaths who, Gavin Newsom may be the prime example of that, will just say anything to get elected, say anything to gain themselves more power, which is exactly why, again, we ought to do the same, okay? They want to take gloves off when it comes to redistricting. Let's do that as well. So if you live in California, guys, make sure to vote no on Prop 50. If you want my honest thoughts, I'm guessing it's going to pass just because, that's all you got to do to win California. The voters there just pour in a bunch of Democrat dark money, have it convince and manipulate people, and then, done deal. Oh, easy show for the Democrats. But regardless, make sure you go vote. Do your best to defeat it, okay? And I'm rooting definitely for the conservatives in that state, because wouldn't that be so funny? His retaliation fails, but he already opened the floodgates to, the Republicans across the country gerrymandering for themselves and redistricting even more. I mean, let's do that. Let's do that, right? But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.